Jon, man, it's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
I don't even know how long.
Actually, the reason you're on the show right now is the TTC.
Yes. That's where I saw you last.
I know, and it took me a while to recognize you. I'm like, who the fuck is this guy coming up to me? Because I'm really like offstandish with people I don't know. And,
Yes.
and I was like, oh,
Public transit, you kind of have to be.
you know what I mean? Like, because there's crazy motherfuckers on the subway, man.
I know. And you were like in thought and
Hey, I was on the phone. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yo, piss off, man.
I feel like you were actually maybe coming around here.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
biking here. I was like, wait a minute. This is what he was setting up.
Exactly. I remember. So yeah, man, it's been a minute, man. What's been new?
Oh, trying to enjoy summer.
Mm-hmm.
Working, biking a lot, really exploring the city. This is my third year here, like the very beginning of my third year in the city. And I still have I go out on my bike every weekend and I'm like, I've never seen this whole neighborhood before, which is cool.
Yeah, there's a lot. Toronto in the summertime is
awesome.
A++.
It's awesome.
Like, people don't understand what we have here in the summer.
Yeah.
But then winter rolls around.
And it doesn't end.
6 months. Last year, maybe I'm getting older. I don't know what it is. I'm only 34 young. But last winter felt like, I don't know, man. Like, I had enough.
You just got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You get that feeling?
Actually, I'm thinking about this year. The wifey and I are thinking of going to Spain.
Really? Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I've only been there in the summer.
Yeah. Well, it's not like summer. Like, we'll be in the south, like Seville,
Yeah.
Malaga.
Nice.
It's like 20 beats -5 and no sun.
Yeah, it does.
It's like spring
It does.
weather, you know what I mean? Right? And then you see coastal city, like aesthetically speaking, it's nice, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So what new kind of projects have you been working on?
I've been actually really, really busy with clients. I started client work like a year and a half ago, like really, really reluctantly. Just like people emailing and asking and over and no, finally took on one. And now it's gone into like an agency, quote unquote, sort of model. And that's been keeping me really busy.
So what are they coming to see you for? What's kind of the major problem they're having?
Their business, they have like my clients seem to have a good business offline, and they have a website, but that's it. And so they're like lost beyond that. And so they know about this sort of dream of like people finding you and you getting business without like somebody looking up in the yellow pages locally. And so they, I guess, just listen to the podcast enough times and finally just like, hey man, can you help with this? And now it's branched off more even to just like pretty much just like hardcore SEO in the sense because over the year and a half, I've kind of like, okay, I don't want to work with those kind of clients. And then it's like, let's go to these ones and see what works. So yeah, got a small team working on it and it's good.
It's funny how like you don't expect things and it just kind of happens.
It's funny how you fight it for a really long time. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to build software again. I know,
because that's the discussion we had like a year ago because you're building up the software. Yeah.
I know. And so I'm really, really digging it though. It's just, I fought it for a long time, but now I'm not.
You can just use the cash flow from this to build your software.
Exactly. And so I just want to see where I can take it. That's kind of like once something starts to go a bit, it's like, how far can I push this in the next year? So,
but there's an interesting thing that you said. They found you through your podcast.
Yes.
I don't think so. My audience really knows the history of your podcast and how you got into it. I think the story of you getting into it and the lessons you've learned, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think people would really get a lot of value from that. So why don't we kind of dive into that and discuss the process for that?
All right. Could do that.
Yeah.
So the podcast was this month, September like 5th or 6th. And I believe it was 5 years ago. Or it was 6. I want to say 5 because 6 sounds ridiculous.
You're way ahead of the curve.
I guess so. Like, yeah, it was for a lot of things, and a lot of benefits I got, a lot of things I got to do happened because, there wasn't a lot of us, right? So, I mean, it could sort of spiral out of control really quickly in a good way. And it's a lot harder to do that now without having that name behind you. So I was just, the longer story of it is my family and I, so my daughter and my wife and I, we were traveling a lot at the time because I had worked in got into software. And that was like my whole goal. Just create software so we can travel and have fun, right? Well, my daughter was young and stuff. And so we were doing that. And at the trail end of a 2-month trip to Asia, we ended up in the Philippines at like a small mastermind, 20 people. And when it came down to like sitting down at the actual mastermind and like, so what's your problem, John? What's going on? It's like, oh, my problem is I wanted to be able to sit on the beach and work and just like travel and do stuff. And I can do that. I've been doing that now for a year and a half or so. I'm just really fucking bored now. There's got to be something else to this, right? And I'm like really behind the scenes. I'm doing the marketing, the selling, and sort of like coming up with an idea to create it. But I'm beyond that. Nobody knows who I am. Nobody, and not that I wanted to be known, but I was like, I do want to come out from behind it a little bit. And so sitting at the same table was John Lee Dumas and Pat Flynn, who had both started podcasts a year to 2 years before that, and had already taken off. And they were like, John, you got to start a podcast. And I was like, no, not at all. I hate the sound of my voice, and I've never interviewed anybody in my life. So I'm absolutely not doing that. So then we got home like a month later or something, and sitting at our doorstep was this big box, and it was podcasting gear. Pat had sent it to us and like, start the podcast. And I was like, oh, geez. So I still didn't for like 2 to 3 months. And then I was like, screw it. I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to interview 30 people, talk about business, but I'm going to do it like not from a tactics perspective, because that's what was happening. Everybody's talking tactics, how to do things, which is really cool and needs to be. But I was like, I love to talk about why people do things. Like, why do you, because it really sucks a lot of times building stuff, right? Having it fail, having it just whatever, just taking that route is, in a lot of ways, it doesn't make any sense. I couldn't imagine doing anything else, but it's a lot more difficult. So I love that conversation around the mindset of that. And so I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to interview 30 people over the summer, and that's it. I'm just going to put it out, and I'm going to just keep in the software thing. It'll be fun. No big deal, right? I just like instantly, I'm like, I know the 30 people I want to talk to. And so I did it. I recorded 22 of them or something before I even launched in September 5th. And then, I knew how to launch something to a certain degree. I was in a market that wasn't super busy at the time. And then it was like the first 4 weeks, I had like 2,000 downloads or something, or 2,500 downloads. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Then the next month it was like 35,000 downloads. I was like, oh, wow, okay, interesting. And then the next one, it was like 70. I was like, wow, what? And so I literally, at that point, like we were discussing before we started, where when I sort of feel that like spark of something, I like to push it. I don't want to ever, and this goes beyond starting a podcast, but I don't want to ever regret not trying something, not pushing something as far as I think I can push it, or maybe even just to see. So I was like, screw it. I'm going to go all in for a year, see where we can take this. That was 5 years ago. And so now, it's grown into its own thing at this point, beyond just the podcast itself, but it all comes back to there. I think episode 476 or 477 came out today. I still suck at interviewing, but here we are.
What would you say, like looking back, hindsight 2020, what would you say things that you did well? And then if you had a time machine to go back to your younger self, what are things that you would change differently if you approached it again? So the thing I would do the same, which is creating any product, which to me, a podcast is a product, right? It has to fit within a gap. There has to be a gap in the marketplace that you can fill. If I can't even visually almost see that gap, what am I creating? Like nobody else will notice it either, because everything's just
saturated.
Noise. Yeah.
Right. So there was this gap, right? And now you go look and type in like entrepreneurial mindset or something. It's like into iTunes, and there's 1,000 of us. Cool. Awesome. but that same gap doesn't exist. Luckily, I was at a forefront of it, and that helped me a lot. But you really have to find that gap, and it goes into like positioning and stuff. Then like that's what made me unique, is just filling that tiny little bit of a gap, and possibly the fact that I had no idea what I was doing. Like
So ignorance is bliss.
right, but also just like not professional. Like that's what people told me. Like they liked my interviews because they were like, I can just tell you're super into these conversations, and your interview skills are a bit, but you're just super into these conversations, and I get to just sit in with them. I'm like, cool. Because that's like lots of us like, oh, be authentic and do that. Make sure you do something you love. And it's like, well, I was just doing it. I didn't want anybody to listen to it, really. I just wanted to have these conversations.
I hate the fucking word authentic because it is actually means artificial. Because then you're trying to do something. It's like, you got to be authentic. I'm like, me just being me is me. What do you mean authentic? It's like you label something. As soon as you label something, there's a box.
Right.
And then you're like, your mindset changes. Authentic. Wait a second. Am I behaving the way I should be behaving? What is this authentic thing? You know what I mean?
You overthink being yourself or something.
Just do you.
Right. Exactly. And it's not always that you can talk about something you want on a podcast and have it also fill a gap. But I mean, it was a tweak to it. And then so on the flip side of it, Ameer, the thing that I would do differently, which took me, I'm going to say 2 years to figure out. And the podcast, so it went up, and then sort of went flat, and then started to actually kind of drop down a bit. And I think my enthusiasm for it dropped. But then I realized that like, it was actually a conversation I had with Seth Godin, and it was about the work. And so I was in this like producing podcasts, 3 a week, doing it. It's all about the podcast. It's all about the podcast. It's all about the podcast. And so I talked to Seth, and we were like, I felt like I was stuck in his dip, as he calls it. But I was like, you've been writing a blog post every single day for like 5 years at this point. This was years ago. I'm like, how do you do that work every single day? And he's like, oh, okay, first, Jon, that's not the work. The work isn't producing that. He's like, that's just like baseline default, what I have to do the work that I want to do, which is everything, which is me being here because of that work. But you need to just start getting into the habit of like creating stuff and putting it out, whatever platform you want to use, but that's not your work. Like, unless you become just an official author, and that's fine. But in our space, and like, especially in the business space, it's like, you have to just find what it is you want to create, find what it is, whatever platform, text or audio or video, and then just start creating. And then it's like, okay, so if that takes 5 hours a week, that's not your work. That just has to happen every single week. And to me, it was really profound. It was a profound change because it was a lot of goddamn work doing 3 a week. And then it's like, no, Jon, that's not your work. It's like, I want to disagree with you, Seth Godin, but I won't, because you kind of know what you're talking about. And so that to me was profound. And that like really made it where I could actually create better stuff. And because it didn't feel like I was on like this sort of hamster wheel of just creating so much stuff, it's like, actually, I can kind of more enjoy this, because that's actually just the better I do that, and sort of the faster even, because it allows me more other time in the week and the month and the year, I get to do other cool work. I get to meet other cool people. I get to go on other cool shows. And the better I do that, the more of that stuff I get to do, which is actually the stuff that really drives me now. So those would be the two things. That'd be the thing that like I would do again, and the thing that I wouldn't sort of do again.
And so what did you do to change your direction when the stats started going down?
I just put my head down and just kept going. I was just like, I just have to keep going. Stop checking my stats 5 times a day, all those kinds of things, to the point where they get checked once a month for me now, and they get put into a spreadsheet, and I just check it. But that was it. And just thinking about it, I think, in that way. And I mean, that was not even episode 200 at that point. And so, I mean, it was 300 ago. And so I've gone through those a couple other times, but it's just thinking of it, knowing that the age that we live in, that to do cool stuff that you want to do or that I want to do, you do have to create content of a sort. It's what gives us the people we get to watch, the people we listen to, all that. The only reason we know about them and follow them and care about them is because of something that they already create and brings us in. And I do love the creation process, but it's really hard sometimes. But I do it, and I just have like Seth Godin in the back of my head, like, dude, that's not the work. That's not the work. That's not the work. Do this so you can do the work you want.
I think a lot of people are just scared of rejection. And a lot of people are scared of the fact that, listen, there's no such thing as the end. You know, one of my favorite people to study is Joseph Campbell, and people are always looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And the goalpost always changes. And when you're looking at whether it's podcast creation or business creation, it's the love of the process. It's the skills that you develop, the friendships that you make, the wisdom that you gain, the money can't buy. You know, a lot of people have a hard time of raising their hand and taking onus for responsibility, because if things fail, it's on you. It's not on anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, oh, fuck, man. You mean if I fail, it's on me? I can't blame anybody else? No, you can't. There's a famous Greek saying, if you point a finger at somebody, 3 point back at you.
Ooh.
And so let's kind of fast forward. So you've been doing this for 5+ years. You know, you have hundreds of thousands of downloads of the show. What would you say is, what have you noticed since in the last 5 years? Like, what is that platform given you the opportunity that if you've never done it before?
What's it giving me the opportunity to do?
Yeah. Because, you know, like everyone's talking about podcasting thing. It seems like everyone wants a fucking podcast, you know?
Right.
Like Conan O'Brien now starting a podcast. My favorite new podcast, believe it or not, is Tyson's Hotboxing.
Whoa.
Oh, bro. Fucking crazy.
Wow. Tyson's
the man. Tyson, if you're watching this, kudos to you, brother. It's all about the toad. I love it. And, you know, the reason I started this is, you know, I've been in the podcasting space long time before. Like even when you started, I was doing the health podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know. I did 200-300 episodes. I got tired. I left it. You know, like you said, it's a lot of work. Truth be told, I'm just doing this to like right before the show, just to talk to good friends again. Because well, gives me an excuse. Come on over, man. Let's chat. But you know, there's very seldom podcasts I listen to.
Yeah.
You know, very seldom. Out of millions of podcasts, maybe like I can count them on my fingers. And so it's like so saturated and so horrible because everyone's trying to follow everyone else's template, you know? It's like, and also a lot of people are trying to look at the end results like, oh, I'm going to get a podcast. I think I'm going to get 1 million downloads. I'm going to get blah, blah. I'm like, dude, the chance of you doing that is like slim to none. Like,
yeah.
You know, like, and unless you're like willing to put in the work for like fucking 7 years and like really master your craft and get good at what you're doing, forget about it. But you've been doing this now, you know, 5+ years. Like, what would you say is like things that kind of like surprised you, that gave you the opportunity, like your platform, things that you wouldn't even realize it opened doors for you?
Everything. I mean, like my life is mine and my family's life is completely different. I started my podcast in a town called Thunder Bay, Ontario.
I forgot you're fucking from there.
Like the town is 100,000 people, and so like within.
I'm going to pause you. If you guys don't, for the listeners out there, if you guys don't know where Thunder Bay is, it's bumfuck nowhere north of Toronto. I'm talking about what is like 10 hours north.
So the way I like to tell people, especially Americans, is go to Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is what you think is the furthest point north you can possibly go, and then get into a car and drive at highway speed for 6 solid hours, and then you get to Thunder Bay, straight north.
It's so cold there too. Oh my God.
But I started it in my basement office, and within 6 months, I was getting monthly downloads of more people than lived in my town, which I thought was kind of trippy, kind of cool. I was like, wow, I'm talking to more people than there are in this entire city at this point. And nobody had anything to do with this except for me. I just did it. Nobody knew who I was at this point, all this stuff. And that to me, and then obviously like since then now I live here. And I mean, I've met you. Everything, my entire life is, I don't know how it would be if I hadn't have listened to those people, hadn't have done something that terrified me, absolutely, and just went for it. And it was friggin' hard, man. It's friggin' hard to start publishing. But then once you do it, it's kind of just like, I think 476 came out today. I'm not sure. But you know what I mean? But at first it's like, this is everything. And yeah, it's, I don't know if it's as simple as it's the fear why people don't create, but I guess it ultimately is.
I think it all depends on who you are. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like if you look at somebody's body, you have, you know, mesomorph, ectomorph, endomorph. You have different types of traits, you know. It's not that black and white. You have introverts, extroverts, ambivert. You can be a hybrid, depending on if you've done your Myers-Briggs or disc profiling. Everybody's a little bit different. It's like shades of gray, right? It's not black or white. Example, I'm a fucking horrible writer. I can't stand writing. When I have to do it, it's like pulling teeth out of my fucking head. I can't. I'm like, what is this? You know, I can speak faster. Like my brain is working on overdrive. And so video for me is naturally easy. I enjoy conversing and talking. I'm an animated person, you know, but I got friends of mine who are the complete opposite, but they're very cerebral, analytical, detailed oriented. You know, they can spit out like an essay and you read them like, fuck, man, it's like a PhD essay, you know, like crisp, right? They read numbers and very, very, like I said, cerebral. But when it comes to like conversation, even in person, forget cameras, forget all this stuff. Yeah. It's like, it's hard to have, you know what I mean? It's hard to have a conversation, like down to earth conversation.
Right. I mean, there's three mediums, right? There's text, there's audio, and there's video. I feel like everybody gravitates towards one of those. It's very rare that we gravitate to more than one. I mean, we can push ourselves and then go on multi-platforms, whatever, but we all gravitate easiest to one of them. Yeah. And unfortunately, because I absolutely feared it, and I hated hearing the sound of my voice, audio seemed to be the closest one.
Everybody hates your voice. I fucking hate my voice.
I know, totally.
There's some science to it too, so we're not
the crazy ones.
And
I've learned that since now, but I didn't know that then. But I mean, that's another whole thing was I started writing. Like I hadn't really written anything, and then one of my guests came on and he was like, "Hey, would you like to write for this giant website?" And I was like, "Okay." And all I'm thinking is like, I've never written anything. My teachers throughout grade school told me I could never write. I didn't know grammar, and that's all I had in the back of my head. And then I just started doing it, and I realized that, actually I can write. I just need a really good editor, and that's it. And editors can't write, but most writers can't actually do the editing part, and they do screw up grammar here and there, and it doesn't matter. It's the ideas and putting them into a form that's unique to you. And so, I mean, that is something that almost got forced on me through the podcast. Was like, I got asked to do it. And it's like, well, I can't pass this up, right? Like people are fighting to write for that. And it's like, okay, well, sure. And then started doing it. And then I started writing for more and more people. And then I put out a book after that. And it's like, oh, wow. I still don't call myself a writer. I would never call myself a writer, but I do write a fair bit.
Maybe frame it as educator.
No, I mean, I write for blogs and you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not a blogger, but I try and put ideas down onto a screen if necessary. But I think I have a lot of work to go to call myself a writer, quote unquote, because of the goddamn school system and the way the teachers hammered into me that I couldn't do it.
I never passed high school. I got kicked out end of grade 9.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean? So
I failed all of grade 10 except for one class.
Which class
hilariously.
was
that? I don't even know what class that was. I know that I failed the whole thing and then I ended up going to school with the people below me. I know keyboarding was the thing at the time and I failed that.
Yeah.
So it was probably math or science or something that I did pass. But
so when did you start? Because I know a lot of people are interested in this topic as well. When did you decide to start monetizing your podcast?
That's a good question. I decided, see, this is hard taking, and this to me goes into the nuance of the fear and why people don't start things, because it's so out of context because the world, the podcast space, the world in general, has changed from then, right? And so I would tell people, don't think about monetization, but it was like week 3. FreshBooks emailed me, hey man, can I sponsor your show? And I was
FreshBooks, Mike Dermott, right?
Right, exactly. And I was like, oh, and figuring out how do you do a sponsorship? What's a sponsorship contract? And they ended up sponsoring me for a year and a half or something. It just kept, and so it's not like that anymore. And so it's hard to have that conversation because there's people listening and it's oh, I would love to do that too. It's well, unfortunately you missed that train of, not that it can't happen. It's probably not going to happen in week 3 unless you're Conan O'Brien.
Sure.
Right. That's, to me, a huge thing that's changed in podcasting.
So what are sponsors looking for right now? Is there minimum downloads? What are they, what stats are they looking for?
So sponsors, to me, and I only know from my own experience.
The reason why I'm bringing this up, I have a lot of my friends that want to do this on the side.
Yeah.
And they're talking about sponsors. They ask me, but I'm I'm in a position I don't care.
Right.
So I'm I'm building a podcast to get sponsors.
Right.
And you're I don't fucking need it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have sponsors. But the ones who have a plan from the get-go to have sponsors, for me, it's okay, I've never dealt with sponsors. They never dealt with sponsors. You have, and you're correct. Time has changed. When you started, it wasn't that saturated. It wasn't that crazy. You know what I mean? Now it's fuck, like I said, everyone's having a podcast, right? So what, currently today, what are they looking for?
They're looking for an audience that's niche market specific. And I mean, I'm talking from the DIY small podcasters, which I'm one of them, right? I'm not the Rogans of the world and stuff, right? Those guys play on a different field that I don't know how that works, but with mine, people basically want to come in and test. I'll only allow people to test 3 episodes minimum because there's a lot of just getting them up and running. And they just want to know that, to me, you can have fewer and fewer and fewer downloads down to the hundreds if you have a very product managers for
super niche. Yeah.
I have 350 of those, and it's whoa, a couple companies are just whoa, I will pay you. You know what I mean? Because they know what a customer's worth to them. So there's that. There's a lot within the marketplace of lots of people just throwing it at the wall, seeing what works. At podcast advertising, it's they know that it works for a lot of companies, but it doesn't also work for a lot of companies. And so it can be hard in that way. But as a podcaster, it's just sales. And I know a lot of podcasters don't want to hear that, but I feel like I could almost sell podcast advertising for anybody's podcast. As long as it's good, as long as it's got some sort of an audience, and as long as it really focuses in on somebody, then outreach, sell. Outreach, sell. And then it's somewhat of a numbers game at that point. And again, I don't have to deal with any of that. I have a sponsor page and people just come through the door and ask to buy, and we're sold out till the end of the year. It's just how it is. And it just, that's not fair, but it's the way it works. And then beyond that, it's just a basic contract that you can find on Panda Docs or whatever. There's sponsorship podcast, sponsorship documents at this point. That part's easy, but it is sales, right? It's like real estate, because there's no other show that's exactly your show that exists. There's only one, and it's only worth what somebody will pay for it. And so if you can sort of make that sale, make that pitch, and focus on them and their audience and making it work for them, then they'll do it. And then beyond that, you have to then hold up your end of the bargain, which is you have to try and get them as many customers as possible. So you should get a unique code of some sort, because otherwise they can't track it. You should get a unique URL that actually says hi to your listeners. It works way better for people. If they're not willing to do that, it's not going to work, and they're going to blame you for it. And that doesn't matter, but it's kind of just, it's a shitty situation to be in. And so just make sure you have those things, a decent contract, and just go out there and be told no a bunch of times until somebody's like, all right, sure.
What would you say was your most surprising guest that you had on? I
have to say, still, to this day. And she was probably 60 or 70, like that number of guests. And her name is Dame Stephanie Shirley. And so I had interviewed this lady, Emma, I want to say Emma Johnson, super smart lady from the UK. She was running a really cool business. And so we did that. And she was like, right after the conversation ended, or the recording, and then we're just chatting. And she's like, oh, would you like to interview this other person? I think you guys would be perfect. And so I had never heard of her, right? And so I just type it in, like Wikipedia comes up. I was like, oh. And so she ended up setting me up to this lady. And this lady is, at the time, this was like 4 years ago now, 5 years ago, she was like 78 or something. And she had started a software business in the UK in the like early 60s when it was punch cards. And she not only did that, but she only hired women. Women who weren't allowed to work typically. And like she just did everything sort of against what the norm was at the time. And this business ended up like getting restructured. And eventually in the 90s sometime, she sold it for like several $100 million. And when I interviewed her, she was running like 3 different like not-for-profits and stuff. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like you're 78 and she's like, yeah, I mean, when I get old, I'll probably just like go have tea with the ladies and stuff. So you're almost 80. And since then she's done a TED Talk at the TED Talks Vancouver last summer, I think it was. There's a book out now about her. But like her life story was, it was, I want to say, so it wasn't the first time that I was nervous to talk to one of my guests, because I was nervous to talk to lots of them because they were just people I'd sort of like admired their work. But her, I was just like, you shouldn't be talking to me. Like she, from like the war and like getting sent on one of those kiddie, like all these things I didn't even know about. But she was Jewish and got like sent with just like her sister when she was like 3, removed from her parents, and all of this stuff. It's just crazy. And then
see, I have a theory for that, man. The grit theory. I think one of the things that, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's like huge political turmoil happening right now. There's more divide. People trying to label everybody, pointing fingers, fingers, blah blah blah. The left is going to the left. The right is going to the right. Regular people in the bell curve are like, I just want a regular life.
Yeah.
And these two sides are warring. If you study the stuff from like Steven Pinker, or even like Eric Weinstein talks about this, even Sam Harris as well. I'm specifically speaking for like Western Europe or the Western nations, North America. We've gone the longest period of time with peace. Now, this peace creates kinetic energy. It creates political kinetic energy. Bad emotional energy, also positive energy. And eventually, like any boiling pot, it explodes, right? Like a pressure cooker. And so the question is like, are we reaching that tipping point where like something's going to give? And the reason why I bring this up is like, I look at my parents' generation, they went through, my dad went through 3 wars. Not 1, but 3. My mom went to 2, World War II and Yugoslavian Civil War. Right, so there's actually interesting studies they've done with people who've gone through. First, they did it on people who survived war. Then they did it on people who survived very traumatic incidents in their life, and they have a better appreciation for life, more grit. So this lady that you're speaking about, she, the Nazis, Holocaust, Auschwitz.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like that's fucked.
It's like beyond comprehension.
Right. So your psyche builds certain tools. Has to, as a defense mechanism, or else you just go you have psychosis. You snap like a lot of people did. And this grit, man, this is something that's missing today, man. The grit is fucking missing.
Yeah. It's, so, I mean, there is, the division is one thing, but like, does this like soft period also, does it also, I'm trying to like think this through of, it sucks. It sucks what's happening, right? It's just like mind boggling. I mean, our governments are going right, like in crazy ways, right? Like, I mean, from England to us in Ontario.
They're going polar opposites. You have sections of government going here and then here.
Right.
In the middle is like, where's room for the middle?
Exactly. And so that's tough, but I feel like this time also does, we lose the grit, you're right. But we do we gain compassion maybe, or not compassion, but like a furthering of like the psyche of humanity. And so what I'm relating to is in the sense of we are the whole woke thing and all that stuff. And lots of that's just whatever, but there's a lot of good to it. And there's a lot of like stuff where we're wealthy. We get to sit around and contemplate shit. We didn't get to do that, right? And when, from your parents' generation, like if you're going through wars, you don't get to do that. You survive. And yes, it gives you grit, but it doesn't always further us as much, or like, no, it furthers us in different ways as society. So what I'm getting at is I don't think that I think the loss of grit is something that you're absolutely right about, but I don't think it's all bad, because I do think that around that does give us this ability to, and I think it is a deeper sort of empathy maybe of other people, like just from what my daughter goes through at school, like the teaching and all the stuff. Like,
how old is she?
She just started high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Crazy,
Wow.
man. This year, like last week. But just like going through that, she was homeschooled for a couple of years in the middle so we could travel. But the perception and the way they deal with each other and acceptance and things, it just wasn't done in the 90s when I went to school. It was not like that. And to me, there's something good about that. But I do appreciate the fact that there's like 30 and 35-year-old people just living in parents' basements and they can't function.
I think it's a multi-variable issue. With social media, like Jonathan Haidt talks about this, right? Specifically affects young women or girls. I think there's a lot of things have happened. Number one, obviously we've had economic issues. A lot of the blue collar middle class jobs are getting squeezed. It doesn't help that the Fed is printing money through quantitative easing and our buying power is decreasing. What's the point in making 3 times more money when the buying power is losing about, inflation 2% plus tax plus products increasing? On average, you're losing about 3.5 to 5% per year for purchasing power.
It would probably still be nice for a lot of people to still have their wages going up to match that at least, but I get what you're saying.
The Fed just needs to stop printing money and go back to gold reserve.
Yeah.
Our buying power needs to increase. Hence, buy Bitcoin. Our sponsor today is brought to you by Satoshi Nakamoto. Buy Bitcoin. So it's a multitude of factors. You have social media, which is causing mental crisis in young females, like crazy depression, suicide. They're affected more. Like you give boys, and Jonathan talks about this, highly recommend reading his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. You give boys internet, cell phone, whatever, video games, porn.
Right.
They're not that psychologically affected per se, right? Girls are the worst when it comes to social creatures. Girls, women, it's a hierarchical battle between females, right? First of all, it's what's it in it for me? Second of all, how do I look from the perception to my other females, right? So they're always compare. And they ridicule each other extremely. Boys, we have a different way of settling differences.
Right.
And it's done.
Right.
I probably won't talk. I've been in a million fights. I'll have a beer with you after. No, I've done it, man. Like we'll fucking fight it out like 2 deers, what I mean? Like, okay, right. We're good, right? We have a means of aggression. On the other hand, young girls, they're not physical per se, at least majority, let's say 99%. So their thing is more chronic. It's verbal abuse, group pressure abuse. So that's one thing starting at early age is social media. Like I think we're going to look back 10, 15 years and be like, this is like smoking cigarettes. It's a tool, and I'm not saying like so I have a car. Cars kill more people than guns. It's a fact. Human beings are horrible drivers, especially now everyone's like, I can drive, no problem, bang. You know what I mean? Like it's ridiculous, man. When I cross the road, I watch a million times these days. Like, drivers are fucking insane.
Yeah.
Like crazy, man. I get hit like almost once a day when like, oh, oops, run a red. And so, like any tool, the tool's innate. It doesn't have like sentient intelligence, right?
Right.
So you have these social media platforms, whatever, you name it. And it's not like us saying, bye-bye, social media. I think it can be used for good, right? Like, look what we're doing right now. A lot of good can come out of it.
Right.
However, I think we have to start at a very young age of understanding there's a time and a place for things. There's a context for things. And I think the education needs to start from an early age of how to use these tools better. You know, that's one aspect of society that needs to change. Second aspect of society that needs to change specifically relates to males, young males. Back in the day, you can even view right now with certain hunters and gatherers, even certain cultures, they still have a right of way, a passage, where there is a psychological trigger. Is a trigger of a boy turning into a man. It can be something so simple as a father passing his rifle, or a father spending time in a 2-day camping trip where they go through an extreme adventure or experience, and the father gives the son something. It can be even like whatever, a symbolic gift. That moment, there's a psychological trigger. Females, they naturally, by nature, are given a psychological trigger. They menstruate.
Right.
We don't, right? And so that's why you see a lot of young, angry men today. They're still boys in men's bodies. They've never had that psychological evolution to have responsibility. And it's a multitude of different factors, you know. The father's not really in their life. Doesn't mean he's not there, but he's not part of the family. Number two, you have the fact of, and this Jonathan Haidt talks about this, is the advent of helicopter parents, right? We'll make everything easy for you. It's like, how does that benefit anybody anywhere? You want them to, it's like a puzzle, learn the skill, fail. You know, failing is going to be very normal in life, right? Get back up, learn, enjoy the process. Don't enjoy the incentive.
Everybody wins now, man.
It's fucked. It's so fucked. You get a prize, you get a prize, you get a prize. Give me a break. How's that training society to be better?
Right. It's not.
It's not.
No, it's not. So I guess unpacking it to a certain degree, the social media thing, I guess I want to disagree to a certain, I think it's rather just like, it just is. Social media is just a tool that's just there. It might amplify some of the things. Well, obviously it amplifies a ton of things, but the relationships, I don't know if that changes it for, I mean, I'm a father of a young girl, right? And I had sisters growing up. They used to just talk on the phone for hours and hours and hours and hours, and there'd still be fights and things going on. But this idea of it like bringing in depression, and depression is like a thing now that everybody's talking about, discussing it, which they rightly should be. Again, when I went to school, nobody fucking talked about depression ever. Like it wasn't a thing. You know what I mean? And there's an older generation, my generation, and then older even, that like, especially like my parents, like scoffing at these kids. Oh, everybody's depressed now and stuff. And it's like,
yeah, but do you think the fact that you didn't notice depression, maybe the fact that there is actually more depression?
Well, see, that's
like, I grew up with no social media. I was probably the last generation. I'm 85, so I'm 34, 35.
Right.
And so I didn't get like a smartphone until I was like 22, 20. Like, I was past my
right.
Teenage years. I used to be a big fucking partier, socializing 24 clubs 2-3 times a week, raves, you name it, like outdoors, no fucking cell phone. The cell phone I did was like what the fuck was it? Motorola? No, the Razor. Who had the Razor phone? What company was it? Was it Motorola? Nokia. No. You know the Razor, like the Matrix fucking Razor phone. Yeah. So that's a phone I had for a long time, and my original phone, like the Nokia brick snake, right? And I enjoyed being in the moment of those events. I was socializing. I wasn't being bombarded by, oh my God, look how beautiful that person is on Instagram. Oh my God, John's living his life. He's traveling around the world. Oh, and then I'm going to sulk in my tears over here because I'm not living your life. You know what I mean? You have all these psychological, social pressures building up in you, and this is happening subconsciously. Like, I was never exposed to that, ever. I wasn't aware of anybody else doing anything. I was just in the moment, my whole generation.
Well, you were aware of like celebrities and stars and things.
Yeah, but it wasn't 24/7. You didn't have access to 20. The only way you can have access for that is like I go on the fucking internet or get a magazine. It wasn't, Instagram did not exist. Facebook did not exist. YouTube did not exist.
The internet in this way didn't exist.
It didn't really exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, it was still like dial-up. I remember 256-bit or whatever it was. Like we weren't bombarded by all these social pressures. You know, the cognitive load that people are under today. And the science is coming out day by day. You know, like people are waking up viewing Instagrams like, ooh, oh, got to view my phone right away in the morning. Is that healthy?
No, it's not healthy. But I think we tend to do a lot of things in our teens and 20s that aren't healthy.
Bro.
And so that's a whole different thing where this... Like,
I've done too much stuff.
I know, me too. Way too much. The stuff I was doing at 16, I mean, all I can say is I'm so glad people couldn't just take pictures and post it permanently online.
All the time. That's why I'm so happy I was like one of the last generations before all this shit.
You are
the
one
shit
of the last.
that I fucking did. Man.
Yeah. Imagine if that was documented.
Oh, God.
Imagine if you were looking at my bio today and you like, I don't even know if you should come on the show, man.
It's crazy.
Right. And so that's different, right? That's totally different. But I don't know. I like, so there's bad things to it, right? Again, it's gray. All of this is. But this idea that it's what created this sort of like depressed generation, I think is bullshit. I think we just weren't aware of it. And this
we weren't aware of it. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, and it existed as a thing. But again, this goes back to me where I was like, we are wealthier. We're freer to do things. We travel like people didn't travel the way we travel. You know what I mean? Like it's just all the time. Like either like my daughter or her friends are just like, oh, we were in France, we were in Spain, we were in like, and it's just so not a thing anymore. I mean, when I was in grade 9, it was like if somebody was ever going to like Winnipeg or Vancouver, it was like a big thing. Yeah, you know what I mean? Not just like, oh wow, that's where you went for the weekend. Yeah, of course, cool. That's different. That's really different, and it does give us this freedom. It allows us or enables us to I mean, not just contemplate things, because obviously when we're checking Instagram all the time, we're not contemplating, but it does, I think, as a society, give us more freedom to stop. And so for me to stop as a parent and actually give a shit about like how my daughter might be feeling or thinking, which not that my parents didn't care, of course they did, but they never stopped and asked. Like it just wasn't a thing. And nobody's like, maybe you should go see a therapist.
But no
like,
one taught you that, did they? You just learned from your own experience. It's not like you went to a class like, John, well, this is how you're going to...
Right, but I'm saying that I think that is afforded to me because of the lifestyle that things around me have allowed me to live, right? The internet as it is, being able to run a podcast and like not have to work that much is not a thing that happened 20 years ago.
No, it's a luxury beyond a luxury.
Right.
It's like 0.0001% of the world.
Right. But I mean, to me that like, so there's the grit and the loss of grit, and that's terrible. That's a thing that we do need to sort of analyze. But I do think that it's not all bad. I think that there's a lot of good things coming out of it. I think us, hopefully as like a human race, will come out better and will be more evolved in this process.
I think so. Like there's a Buddhist saying, it is as it should be. You know, like a passing cloud, it comes, it goes, right? You know, it's like the butterfly effect. You look back in hindsight and realize, well, if that didn't happen, this wouldn't happen. So like dominoes. I'm seeing it right now. I think there's one thing missing though, and has kind of something to do with the internet a little bit, but more or less has to do with metropolitans, like cities and the busy life, is one aspect of human beings is we're very tribal, right? So Racism doesn't exist naturally. Tribalism does. It's a real thing. You can see in the animal kingdom. Different chimps, different apes. You go to their territory, shit's going to fucking get real. Okay?
Yeah.
It's resource guarding at its finest. That's all it is. Resources of female for mating and resource of manja, food. That's it. You know what I mean? That's a real thing, tribalism. The underlying thing with tribalism, though, is community. That's one thing that our lifestyle, right? Well, I got to work X, Y, and Z. I have to be in the city, stuck in traffic an hour here, hour back, right? Social media, you think you're connected, but you're not really connected. You're enjoying what your friends are doing, chatting, blah, blah, blah. We're more disconnected than ever. And if you look at like the psychology of humans, and this goes back to what you said earlier, we are in an existential crisis of abundance. People have the Maslow hierarchy of needs for the most part, not everybody, but like in Canada, even if you don't have a job, you can at least have shelter and you can have food. Mm-hmm. You know, you're well off way more than somebody poor in India or somebody poor in Africa. Like you're poor over here is like them rich over there. Right. And luckily we have good organizations and systems, etc. And so what I see happening slowly is people are waking up and saying like, I want to opt out. You know, like for example, in Toronto, where we are, to live normally, I'm not talking about like, oh, I'm living. To live normally, D-town Toronto, you need like 80K. Mm-hmm. Like rent, 2-bedroom, something simple, small with no parking, you're starting at 2,500. Starting. That doesn't include utilities or anything. That doesn't include parking spot. That doesn't include anything. Like you need base bone, like $4,500 a month base. Mm-hmm. Like the most basic of the basic to even live and breathe D-town Toronto. 80K is like, yay, I have a roof and food, right? And you're busting your ass for that 80K.
Right.
You hardly see your friends or family, etc. And then you realize like, why am I doing this? You know, you can go live at places like 3 hours north of Toronto or outside of Toronto, 1/10 of the cost. You know, I used to live in British Columbia, Kelowna, a couple of years. There is a city in British Columbia called Nelson. It's like a hippie little Canada. Beautiful, man. It's fucking gorgeous. You know how cheap it is to live in Nelson?
Yeah.
Fucking cheap.
Yeah.
Like super cheap. Like it's breathtaking. Like you're in like awe 24/7. Like you just step outside, you're like, like in surreal beauty. Like I can't even describe it in words how beautiful with the Rocky Mountains and the lake over there. It's like unreal.
Right.
And so I think the aspect of like, why am I working so hard for so little? Coupled with the fact of like, when's the last time I broke bread with anybody? Like really breaking bread, sitting down, having a community. I think we're going to see very soon an exodus of people opting out and trying to figure out simpler lives. That's the biggest problem with humans. We're not living. Joseph Campbell talks about, we're not experiencing life. We're just living life right now. Cool, you're making $250 a year salary working for a company, working 100 hours a week. Never see your partner, never see your kids, or never see your friends. Whoopee fucking do. That's not living. What is that? You're a robot. You might as well be a robot. And that's what people are missing, that deep-rooted connection of just having conversations, enjoying company of friends and family. And this is something I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it pans out in the next like 10, 15 years.
So when you mentioned like Nelson or 3 hours north of here, it's smaller, it's 1/10 the cost. Does the tribalism still exist?
I'll give you my personal experience. So when I moved to Kelowna is not small. It's about 100K, like around Kelowna. Summertime grows by 4x population. Everybody from Calgary and Vancouver come. But the Okanagan Valley, maybe it's like quarter, like the total valley, give or take. Kelowna, not West Kelowna, but main Kelowna, from a geographical area is tiny. Like the actual downtown is one street that I can walk in a minute, maybe. You know what I mean?
Massive lake.
Beautiful lake. You know, I lived on Sunset Drive, right beside Knox Mountain, you know, million yoga studios. But it was a weird thing that happened to me when I went there originally. And the reason I went out there, my wife was finishing her undergrad at UBC. So we lived there for 4 years. People, and I was taken aback by it because I didn't know how to respond initially. People smiled at me and said, hello, how you doing? And I was like, it took me a while to register and to behave properly with that happy greeting from random strangers. Because if someone in Toronto came out, hey man, how you doing? I don't fucking know you.
Really? You're a bit aggressive for people do say hi.
I don't know, man.
Or they at least smile and like, nah.
It's different. It's not just smiling, man. Like everyone was like open, like very community driven. They have a lot of homeschooling over there. So when you go to these malls, everybody knows everybody just because of numbers, and they have a different type of lifestyle. It's slow pace. It's nice. Everybody knows a coffee owner shop by name. Everybody knows a restaurant owners by name.
I hated all of that. I've left Thunder Bay twice now, and I'll never go back.
And so Thunder Bay is different. Thunder Bay is, you got the cold, man. The reason why I liked Kelowna was I had the Rockies. I had Lake Kamulka, the beautiful Emerald Lake over here, Lake Kelowna. I'll show you afterwards where I lived. It was like a fucking resort. It was insane.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. Unreal. Yeah. Like unreal beauty. Like I still couldn't believe I was living there. I wake up, I'm like, where the fuck am I? This is unfucking, like, I couldn't comprehend where I was living. Like it was hard for me.
Yeah.
But it was that connection. And there's cons to it too. It takes time to build into it, trust to build, right? But there is, I noticed I had much, after living there for a year, I noticed I had a calmer demeanor. I was much more chilled a little bit. And there's like fun to it. Like, you know, people by first name, they have events all the time. It's interesting. You know what I mean? But I think what it's going to happen, and I know a couple of friends doing this right now, I think we're going to have more intentional communities where it's kind of mapped and planned.
Right. I mean, online people are trying to do that,
Correct.
right? In meetups and things. And so, interestingly enough, and so maybe I'm not the usual, probably because most people live in cities, but the idea of that calm and sort of more chilled is good, but it's not good for long periods of time. Meaning we moved from Vancouver to Thunder Bay, and it was supposed to be just like a pit stop, and we stayed there for way too many years and then finally came here. But the last couple years there, like I just fell into like a pit of like despair. And not like necessarily like, you know what I mean? But it was, I didn't push myself to build more things, to do cool stuff. I was surrounded by complacency. I was surrounded by people making $30,000 a year and happy about it. Well, not even happy about it, but just, this is how it is.
Contempt, yeah.
And that really, really, really weighed on me. Like I wanted to be surrounded by people who were just doing cool stuff all the time. It's amazing. I wanted to be able to see lots of music. I wanted to be able to see lots of art, things that I couldn't do there. And I mean, it just mentally and every other aspect of me at this point is like thriving just in like the last 3 years here. And that's still not to say, because my wife is different and she needs more nature and stuff. And so we do have to go out and like go to like a
The best of both worlds
and
is like a 2-3 hour place outside of a major city.
maybe, but I wouldn't come in as much.
You don't have to come in that much. You come in for good occasions.
Right. I see a lot of live music right now.
Yeah.
Like 1 or 2 shows a week kind of thing. And I mean, because where I live, I literally just can walk. Like,
it's down
amazing.
the street, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm not going to want to do that forever, but for now, it's fucking great. Mm-hmm. This is why I worked hard to be able to do this. Mm-hmm. It's fun. And so there is that other side to it. But then here's the question somebody asked me the other day, and it made me think, which is like, how often do you see friends?
It depends. Like my high quality friends.
Like, hey, let's go out for a coffee. How often is that?
I have a system. So my good friends, no matter what, we break dinner together every month, like a group setting.
Yeah. And
then at least for me, I try to at least have a coffee or lunch 2 to 3 days a week with people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's for me. Yeah. I've been doing that for a while.
Crazy.
And I already have lunch, so like,
right.
Why not fucking have lunch with my friend?
I don't have lunch, so that's the whole other thing.
Or coffee.
Right.
The lunch hour, let's say.
Right.
The lunch hour, I tend to have it with people. And it's just the hours booked, so it can be coffee, it can be sitting down, really doesn't matter. you know. So I try to, I don't want to say strategically, but I like to make the effort. I know people are busy. Yeah. And so for me, my system is like, okay, 2 weeks before we meet, put in our calendar. You know, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, the reason why I started this is like another fucking reason to meet my friends. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of, you know, I might be the outlier, but I think a lot of people, you know, like maybe it was like a year and a half ago, I was crazy busy and I couldn't see anybody. I went like months. Like I was just swamped, you know, about my wedding, planning for the wedding, this and that, like fucking swamped, and I couldn't see anybody. And like, I think if people really care, they'll make an effort to do it, but everyone's a little bit different. But yeah, like, I don't know, what kind of point were you trying to get to with that?
Well, just because recently, Peter Levels on Twitter, so the guy who created Nomad List, he just literally asked like a poll, and there was 4 options, and it was like, how often do you meet in real life with friends? And it was like once a month, once a week, many times a week, every day kind of thing.
Yeah.
And mine was like once a month. And I was like, oh man, it's going to be, and it was, I wish I could bring it up, but I can't, but it was a staggering amount of people with the 1 month and then a couple times a month. And I was like, wow. So it really, but that's like in real life friends. I talk to my best friends online daily or on like WhatsApp, or we get on calls, and you know what I mean? And people that I've met online, like not people I've ever lived in the same city as or anything. But I don't typically, I mean, I'm also fairly new to a city, and I mean, I more know.
You've been here for a while.
Right. But it gets harder to just sort of get into different crowds, and like I almost more see people as they come through the city that I just know, and it's like, oh, cool, I live here now, and so we hang out. But I found that sort of fascinating because it's in that sense of the isolation and but also it's like we're isolated physically, but like mentally and psychically and stuff, we're not necessarily, because I get to have relationships, deeper and better relationships than I could have had without any of this around us. And so I guess I just like to play the devil's advocate of things where it's not always just isolating us into these places where we just never converse with other people and interact with other people, that there are other ways to do it that didn't exist without this. And to me, that's massive.
Yeah, hence why it's a tool.
Right.
So it's how you use it.
Right, but it always gets the idea of just like, it's terrible, it's ruining our society.
Well, they use that for PR, right? It sells. It can't be like, well, this is a fine balance argument, and we have analytical data to some people like, what?
That's one thing I've learned as I got older, that everything is gray. Everything's
gray.
I used to be so like, damn it, it's this, or it's this, or it's this. And now it's like, it depends.
It depends. Like, same thing with the environment. They're like, if you look in the past like 40 years, like previous politics or like think tanks, and they're like, oh, we're gonna die in 10 years, the planet. I'm like, it's been fucking 50 years. I'm not dead yet. You know what I mean?
At some point it'll be true.
Well, we might die.
Right.
But like,
well, we all are gonna die.
I personally don't care. Like, for me, the Earth will remain. The Earth has been bombarded by ridiculous amounts of gamma radiation and asteroids and meteorites, and like, for example, like K2, the crazy event, like what was 100 million years ago. The Earth's fine. The problem with humans is themselves. They can't handle the shit, the human beings will disappear. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not into that whole egotistical thing, like, oh, humans are the center of the fucking universe. You know,
right.
we're just another creature within the universe.
A very small one.
A very small one, right?
Yeah. Very small, conceited one.
Yeah, so I think it'll be fine. I think people overplay everything. Everything you see on media and everything you see with politics is just like blowing up shit to get votes, blowing up stuff to get clicks. That's it, man.
That's a weird thing. It's a scary thing to me. The politics of facts don't matter is scary. Like, literally, whoever has the biggest platform and can say nonsense, that's now like gospel truth. The media lies about everything, and whatever this person gets the most retweets, it's like, that's now the truth, and facts just are completely irrelevant. That's scary as shit. And I don't know how we overcome that, because you get politicians who want to come in and try and like go against politicians doing those kinds of things and play it the normal politician straight way of not making stuff up. And I don't know how you beat people just making stuff up.
We have to create a better game theoretical model for checks and balances with governments. I'm not a big fan of nation states. I'm definitely a fan of borders. When people say no borders, I'm like, you're a very naive individual.
Yeah.
Extremely naive. Borders exist in nature. They're real.
Yeah.
Once again, tribalism. You're a chimp and you walk to another chimp's border, you're going to get fucked.
Yeah.
So borders are real and we need it for a reason. That's not the question. The question is, how do we counterbalance a cancerous growth of government? Because all the government is it needs to grow. It needs to collect more taxes. It needs to misuse our taxes, right? Like, I don't know where the fuck it goes.
Yeah.
In a black hole of like, and it needs to hire more bureaucrats. That's the job of the government. Now, in nature, there's checks and balances in nature. In computer science, we use something, and I'm not a computer scientist, but we use, game theoretical models, right? Where it's like you have all these different scenarios. What happens in these different scenarios? If this happens, then what? If that happens, then what? So forth. All these different options and variables. And there is no perfect government system, but there are systems that are better suited for game theoretical models. For example, in the United States, they have a better game theoretical model than Canada. Because if you look at United States from a purely objective matter, they're not a democracy, they're a republic. Meaning they have constitutional laws that can supersede people's behavior, like bad actors, and certain democratic votes to go in that may go against the well-being of all the states. So they have certain veto power, certain constitutional rights that can supersede democratic vote.
It's being tested.
It's being tested. Listen, it's been eroded a lot.
Right.
Right. Like, it's not a true republic anymore. Not even fucking close. Right. Like, not at all. States don't have independent power anymore. Now, there are current systems today that have a pretty, and they're small, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. How does this evolve into a nation of, for example, Canada? You could actually, at least for our size and people. I think demeanor and culture, like context. You look at Switzerland and how Switzerland's created. Switzerland is created by a central governing government that's responsible for security. It's responsible for standard goods, and that's pretty much it. Then you have something called cantons in Switzerland. These cantons are initially city-states in Switzerland. Each city-state has a veto right to supersede against the central powers if they misbehave. Each city-state has independent constitutional right to dictate their own laws and rules, own taxation rules, own anything rules. That means each canton has to be very strategic in not utilizing their playbook in a bad way. Because let's say Canton A decides to put taxes up to X, Y, and Z. Canton B decides to put lower taxes. Citizens will just go, I'm going to drive an hour or go live in Canton B. So it's a game theoretical model. If I do something, there's a reaction to it. So everyone has to keep everyone checks and balances, as well as each of them has a veto right in case the federal government or the national government decides to misbehave in a certain way. They can come in and actually have a say into it. So it creates checks and balances, and also works how nature tends to work. In nature, there's not a hierarchical government on top like a dictator saying, everybody behave this way, right? Context. Nassim Taleb has the best saying, I'm a communist with my family. I'm a socialist with my friends. I'm a conservative with my province. I'm a libertarian with my country. Hierarchical, right? Context matters. Context. And so I think for us to keep checks and balances with a centralized government, I would love to see Toronto become a city-state where Torontonians benefit. I'll give you an example that happened about 2 years ago. And I have no idea if... So let me rewind. The Toronto Council voted in favor of toll booths, I believe, somewhere on the DVP. I have no idea if this is good or bad, so I never looked at it. I have no idea, but they voted, right? Ontario provincial government came in and said, no. Well, what the fuck? We're the one, you and I pay taxes. Maybe it's good for us. I have no idea, but let's say it is. Why aren't we allowed to put our own toll booths on here? Right? Why aren't we allowed to dictate how certain taxes are created in Toronto? Why do we need the Ontario government to tell us how to live over here?
Right.
Right? So when you create city-states, you create competition. That's the key. Checks and balances. Because let's say Toronto starts creating really bad rules, and then all of a sudden, like, you have Mississauga, like, hey, well, no income tax in Mississauga. Where do you think I'm fucking moving tomorrow? I'm moving to Mississauga.
Right.
And this United States kind of had this, like Texas doesn't have income tax, Florida as well. You see a massive exodus right now from New York and California to Austin, Texas, or Texas in general. Like they're having a boom. Mm-hmm. Businesses are moving there. Real estate's like fucking skyrocketing.
No state tax.
You know, property tax the same as here, whatever.
Right.
But like income tax, like,
right.
Why not? Like, shit,
right.
I'm in.
So the city-state is hard, I think, beyond a city the size of Toronto.
Well, Singapore is a city-state size of Toronto.
But I mean, in the context of Ontario and Canada, like we have a massive portion of the population of the country. Mm-hmm. So I can see why. And I mean, that's why, to go back to the DVP example, I mean, that's exactly why they don't allow us to do that, because it benefits us. And even though we have to pay to maintain that stuff, it doesn't benefit the people in the suburbs.
Yeah, but people in suburbs will be city-states as well. They compete. You create game theoretical competition. That's the whole point. It's not just Toronto is a city-state. Mississauga is a city-state. Timmins is a city-state. Barrie is a city-state. Every city is an independent county. Right.
Right. And all I'm saying is, like, with the DVP, that's why that happened, was because the voters,
yeah.
They're not going to screw those voters over. And
it's very simple. The direction that we're taking or going, there's only one way this is going to end. We're going to be bankrupt, and the government's going to grow, and nothing's going to get done. It's going to get more polarizing, and nothing's going to get done. Like Ontario has the population of like 8-9 million people, give or take. Yeah. California has a population of Canada plus. And we're more debt than California, Ontario. Mm-hmm. You can only print so much more money till you have hyperinflation. You see it right now. You see it all around us. Taxes go up every year. Rent goes up every year. Buying power decreases 4 or 5% per year. It's not going to end well at all.
Right. Yeah. How do you, to go back to the government and the growing of bureaucracy, because I see this happening with old companies.
Make it easier to fire people in the government. There's the answer. It's so bad.
Is it that simple? But I mean, even like, you think like the IBMs and stuff that like have grown into these big monoliths of just almost stopped. Not even slow anymore. They're just almost stopped.
Because they're pretty much a bank.
And yeah, or banks.
Google's a bank. When people look at Google, it's a glorified ad agency that's a bank. That's sitting on $400 billion of cash.
And we still think of them as agile?
No.
In some ways? I mean, more agile than
I don't consider them a real tech company. The only other cool thing they're doing, but it's a subsidiary of Google, so it's not really Google run, is DeepMind, their AI.
Yeah.
But it's not part of the Google DNA. Like, that's a complete subsidiary that they bought, and it's an independent team.
So make it easier to fire people.
In the government, that's a simple thing that you can change tomorrow, is make it easier to fire people.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. So that breeds incentive models of like non-performance. You actually attract the worst people to those positions. That's the thing. You attract very low-hanging vampire type of people to those roles because they don't want to perform. Oh, so I can get paid $80K a year and do nothing and full benefits. I can never get fired.
one of the most dreadful cities in this country is Ottawa.
Yes.
I've said, like, people are like, oh, it's beautiful. It's
Well,
like
80% of the
I know,
city
you're just
is-
walking around. It's like, it's just like a whole bunch of, like, nobody has any personality. They don't care. It's just, all they did was focus to get a job they couldn't lose. And now they just don't want to rock the boat. It's like, man, this is boring.
Talib also said the two biggest addictions on the planet, number one is heroin and number two is a salary.
Fair enough.
Right. So
Never tried heroin. It's been a long time since I tried a salary.
yeah, actually, I never got into it. I never did heroin. I did a lot of drugs, but I never did heroin.
Yeah.
I was smart.
I've done most of them, but not that one.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't even know. I guess I don't remember turning it down. I guess the opportunities.
I don't think so. It was really around when I was back then. Like
That's what I mean.
Coke and ecstasy were like the thing.
I was there.
Yeah, like right at the peak of the crazy 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The good old days.
yeah. Cool, man. Any last things?
I don't think so, man. It's been a blast.
Fucking
I look
hell
forward
yeah,
to where
man.
you're going to bring this.
Oh yeah, crazy stuff.
Cool.
I know people are wondering where they can contact you. So best resource for that?
The website for the podcast, hacktheentrepreneur.com, and Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you find podcasts. You could just track it down there. And if you want to just say hi, Twitter's the place.
Cool, man. Awesome, guys. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, go check it out on iTunes and Libsyn. It's going to be around everywhere. So, well, this is on YouTube as well. And look forward to having you on again.
Yeah, man.
And enjoy, guys. Peace.